right, we've got Facebook up and running. We are set and ready to go. All right, and I have 12:15, so we're going to go ahead and get started. One more time, good afternoon and welcome. Thank you all for joining us for today's webinar, Resolving Conflicts Constructively. Informed Parents Make Informed Choices. We're so glad to have you here today. My name is Stephanie McLaughlin, and I am the Training and Evaluation Specialist for Partners Resource Network. Partners Resource Network is the nonprofit agency that operates the Texas statewide network of parent training and information centers. We are funded through the Department of Education Office of Special Education Programs. And throughout Texas, we have 4 projects known as PACT, PATH, PEN, and TEAM. Our mission here at Partners Resource Network is to empower and support Texas families and individuals impacted by disabilities or special healthcare needs. And also joining us today from Partners Resource Network is our Director of Statewide Services, Christina Henning, our Support Specialist, Chelsea Rivas, and our Technology Specialist, Zach Hildago. If you're having any technical difficulties, please reach out to Zach in the chat box and he can assist you. And for those of you who are needing a certificate of attendance, you will be receiving an email to thank you for attending today's webinar. If you follow the link in the email, you can get your certificate of attendance. At the end of today's presentation, we will have a question and answer time. If you're joining us on Zoom, please type your questions in the Q&A box. And if you're joining us today on Facebook, you can type your questions in the comments. The recording of today's webinar will be available on our website at prntexas.org, as well as our Facebook page. So let's introduce our speaker and turn it over to him. Timothy Hedeen is a senior consultant to CADRE, a national resource center supporting effective and efficient resolution of disputes related to special education. He is also a professor at Kennesaw State University near Atlanta. In a happy coincidence, he'll be in Austin next spring to work with our state roster of mediators too. Dr. Hedeen, welcome and thank you for joining us. I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks, colleagues, for joining us this afternoon. Let me share my PowerPoint screen. So, dear colleagues, you'll note I've already messed things up. I've changed the title, at least the subtitle. So, Resolving Conflict Constructively, Prepared Parents Make Informed Choices. Let me just say again, I'm thankful to Partners Resource Network for hosting me. I've worked with CADRE for probably, over 2 decades now, and we serve all 50 states, the District of Columbia, and all the territories of the United States in ensuring or seeking to ensure, as we spoke of, effective and efficient dispute resolution regarding special education. So allow me please to move quickly through these slides. I'm not going to walk through the description. I consider that sort of the bill of goods, which you read, which enticed you to come. What I do want to highlight is the bottom of this slide, though. Note this workshop is designed to respect and complement the insights and abilities you already have. So I'd encourage you, as I encourage my students in the classroom as well, take what's useful to you and leave what doesn't fit on the rack, and that's okay. I prepared a quick slide for introductions. I believe we've covered all these things already. I'll just cover the middle section here one more time. My role is generally as a mediator, facilitator, and I've served as an ombuds at institutions, both large and small, over the last 30 years or so. It's in addition to my faculty life, where I've been here at Kennesaw State for about 2 decades. As I mentioned, working with parents in schools for over 2 decades, and I've been a parent myself for just about 2 decades as well. So that's me in a nutshell. What I bring to you today would be distillation from my really 30 years of practice in community dispute resolution settings, in court-based dispute resolution settings, and in education contexts, both higher education, K-12 and otherwise. And so my colleagues at CADRE and I distilled out a handful of lessons, and I'll share those with you in terms of my quick agenda here. You may recognize in the speed with which I speak that I used to work in a district attorney's office in New York. And when we work in the district attorney's office in New York, we tend to be a bit loose and colorful with our language, and we speak really, really quickly. And so I'm going to try to speak less quickly that it be accessible. If at any point I'm speaking too rapidly, please flag me in some way and let me know, and I'll try to get back into a useful mode. So, link at the bottom left of the slide there for CADRE's website. More on that as I close at any rate. So here's our agenda today. I'm a big fan of Maria Montessori's approaches to learning, and one of the Montessori insights that I've intuited, perhaps ascribed to her unfairly, is you try not to overstimulate learners or colleagues. 3 points at a time is about what can be handled. Well, mind you, I've got 3 points that each have 3 points, so I'm going to go at a pretty good clip here. But I've gathered these by before you meet, while you're meeting, and after you've met. So just the quick previews here. Understand the map, know your interests and options, channel your most resourceful self. All things before the meeting. While you're meeting, question artfully, listen carefully, reframe constructively. After you've met, make some notes, reflect on your learnings, and know you've got support. So I'm going to move through these at a fairly good clip, and I'm going to invite questions and comments. I'll try to get the chat up in the background here as best I can, but I'd also encourage assistance from colleagues, Stephanie and others, in case I miss something, because I got 2 screens in front of me. So without further ado, let me unpack the map. I'm borrowing here from TEA, Texas Education Agency's website. You've got the link at the bottom right there. But one of the most important elements that those of us who work in and around disputing would point to is that there are usually multiple ways forward, and that when confronted with too large a menu, at least my 2 children tend to get overwhelmed. I know when I'm in a stressful situation, I tend not to read all the instructions. I'd rather ignore the instruction sheet and break the darn thing I bought and then go back and repair it with the instructions. At any rate, I would encourage you, whether you are a parent advocating for your child or confronting a challenge with a school, with a district, or whether you work within a district or an educational agency, one of the things to recognize is the roadmap, the context within which we seek to handle disputes that inevitably arise between families and schools. So, borrowing just a couple interesting highlights here from the brochure that's available online, you'll note we've got facilitation to the left of this slide, all the way to due process hearing on the far right. We won't be spending our time today walking through this in great detail, but the part I want to emphasize is who makes the decision. And one of the things I think that's very important for parents to consider when thinking about how to move forward and engage around some concern, around some disagreement with their child's education or with the IEP, is what's available. So state IEP facilitation, this has been wonderfully taken up across the country over the last 15 years or so, and it's basically about the fact that the ARD committee has the support of a facilitator, and the facilitator spends her or his energies ensuring a conversation can be held in which all parties get to speak their truths, feel heard, and work together toward whatever the plan is going to be going forward in the IEP. Mediation services are provided under the IDEA, and we have an impartial mediator, and that person has a more central role perhaps in orchestrating the conversation. You'll recognize at the bottom though, who makes the decision? The parties. So in a mediation, it's going to be the family. Perhaps they brought support of some sort, an advocate, an attorney, a parent advocate or others. And on the, sitting across the table, but working with them, hopefully, we've got the school district. Possibly if the family brings an attorney, the school district might bring an attorney as well. But you'll note the decision resides within the parties. Complaint investigation, in which anyone might file a complaint and ask for some investigation around how students are being served. Well, that really falls within the role of the TEA, right? An investigator will conduct the appropriate, responsible seeking of information, gathering information, and try to figure out what might be done to resolve this matter. That resolves within the TEA. And then lastly, in the far right, the due process hearing. This most closely approximates court, or if you've ever been subjected to arbitration, a bit like arbitration, but families and districts sort of offer their point of view. and the impartial hearing officer issues the outcome there. So being thoughtful about wherever you might be within a dispute, within a conflict, be thoughtful about what's available. What are the resources? Know the roadmap. You might make an effective choice with which to move forward. My second insight that I like to offer you before engaging would be really around the issue of knowing some fundamentals around principled negotiation. So this flows from a process that came forth in a book called Getting to Yes. You may have heard of this book. It's from quite some time ago, and the and part of the summaries. There's sort of these 4 key points here that I'll offer. I'm going to highlight 2 in a moment, but please recognize on the left of this slide, separate people from problems. It's kind of a simple point of wisdom, and it's also a really hard one to enact. Right? We tend to see within people, you're what's in the way of me attaining what I'm hoping for. Or you've made a decision that doesn't align with what I hope for and expect for my child. When we're discussing the decision or the work, if you can, try not to bring all the energy you have about that concern or that problem right at the person, but recognize they're playing a role within a broader system, and how might you together work on the issue. To the far right, I'll jump to the far right because I'm going to expand the middle 2 in a moment here. Criteria, use objective criteria. Within special education in the United States, we've certainly got a fair bit of objective criteria on offer, whether it be from regulations or laws promulgated at the federal or state levels. We generally know against which we're working or in the backdrop of what we're working. But I want to focus on these middle 2 for a moment, on interests. Focus on interests, not positions. Some arcane language here in the land of negotiation, but I think we can get this quickly. A position is what someone says they want. It's a demand, right? It's a statement of demand. This is what I want. Beneath that, though, informing any position is at least one, and often more than one, interest. So the interests are the why. Why do I seek this? How is this important to me? What will this do for my child? Right? Those are interests. And they get represented very often in negotiations as positions. You might recognize, please, if we argue only at the level of positions, we tend to go to loggerheads. It's like it's a power contest, a contest of wills. When we move the conversation toward interests, we might seek together to try to see where they might dovetail or overlap, or consider, are there options out there that meet more than one interest? Can all parties' interests be met? And indeed, that's the second option here we have on the third point here on this slide. When you're seeking to generate options with your counterparts, whomever they may be, you want to check in. How might we generate options for mutual benefit? How might we seek to meet the students' learning needs and outcomes while also remaining within the logistics or budgetary constraints of the district? As an example, right? Sometimes that can't be done, and we have to figure out other ways to accomplish matters. But within principled negotiation, also called interest-based negotiation, one of the chief challenges and opportunities is to seek options for mutual benefit. Can all parties receive some of what they came and sought for? Can we find a way to dovetail the interests here available? So you'll note, please, on the left side of my slide, the banner there, know your interests and options before you begin. I would, by the way, as a pause, say that within all of those 4 processes that were on the TEA slide a moment ago, I think it behooves families, as well as district representatives as well, to know your interests and options prior to engaging any of those processes. Take time to take stock, and you'll be better prepared. The third and last point I want to raise about before, here's my credit to from whence I got this graphic. The third point I want to talk about before you engage, before you make a phone call or schedule a meeting with the school counselor or with another resource within the district, you might consider, how do you access your most resourceful self? So this is a short reflection exercise. Given our webinar format, it's going to be quite one directional, forgive me, but if you think of a time when you were calm, steady, and confident in a tough situation, You brought balance and reassurance, thoughtfulness and care. You weren't easily thrown off or distracted. You didn't let anyone or anything trigger you, right? These moments for me are few and far between. I have two teenagers. And yet, I can recognize in myself there are moments in the past week or month, or maybe I have to stretch to the year, where I was at the top of my game. I was calm and steady and confident. Right? I brought balance and reassurance, thoughtfulness and care. One of the terms that I often hear people use to describe that is being resourceful. So if I can access my more resourceful self, I can go into challenging conversations with a sense of calm and balance, and I can be a valuable participant, whether I'm advocating for my child or whether I'm working on behalf of some larger principles or efforts. But I got to get straight first. I've got to find a way to be resourceful. As my friends happen to do improv acting have said to me, whenever I've mentioned this point to them, they say, oh, that's a little bit like what we call our work, which we call becoming what's needed. I offer to you, friends, I'm not someone who participates in improv theater, but I am a parent. And I have to think that becoming what's needed is probably the best summary statement for what I think effective parenting looks like. You know, in the morning, maybe I'm the taskmaster. Pack that backpack, brush those teeth. You know, and in the afternoon, maybe I'm the counselor and I'm the head to, I'm the shoulder to cry on because something didn't go right during the lunch break. And then, maybe in the evening when there's a little too much fun and a little too little studying, maybe I'm a disciplinarian and I take those car keys away. But becoming what's needed, I think, is a useful frame for considering the many ways in which you can put forth advocacy for your child, right? Or to represent and work alongside others to accomplish a goal. Now, when I last presented this to a group of parents here we're in section B, I guess, of the country, region B. So we had a large gathering here last year, and I just thought of this phrase I'd seen recently, and I really like it a lot. And it's check yourself before you wreck yourself. Now, I openly take that from a Saturday Night Live sketch in which Christopher Walken was giving some pretty strange advice. But I did like the idea of check yourself before you wreck yourself. Because those times when I've not been resourceful in a stressful conversation or situation, things generally don't go well. And so I offer to you, colleagues, perhaps a relatively simple element of insight here. And I recognize this is going to be highly individual or idiosyncratic. I don't think any two of us find our way to being our most resourceful selves in the same way, but whatever you do, whatever you reference, whether it's having a recollection of a meeting that you did just right, an award for which you were recognized, or just a slamming meal you made in the midst of the craziness of the holidays, whatever it takes you to be resourceful, that's the version that makes best change, best effect when you're engaging around really important issues like your child's education. Let me pause to check the chat here and make sure that I'm not blowing past comments to which I need to be checking in. Who knows who Christopher Walken is? Yeah, Christopher Walken's quite an actor. I won't even try to emulate that. Let me take a step forward then with our slides, dear colleagues. As I warned, I'm going to move quickly to make sure I cover the material, and we can engage in conversation later as you would wish. So here's our agenda. We're now in the middle third. While you're meeting, colleagues, I've already shared with you that I've done mediation as a central profession for over 30 years now. And in fact, I've worked with colleagues in Texas a number of times on issues around community and court-based mediation. So both within the Austin DRC or Bahar County in San Antonio, or some of the law schools there host some of my colleagues and friends in this work. The reason I mention that, though, is that right here in the central box, questioning, listening, and reframing, to my experience, those are three chief skills of a mediator, right? If you would presume to step in the middle of two other parties' conflict, they're disputing actively, but they would benefit from someone taking the role of band leader or facilitator, someone to add some structure to the conversation. The skill sets that we seek to bring as mediators are questioning, listening, and reframing. Let me walk through each of those that you might borrow on these and choose to develop these further if you would as well. So, questioning artfully. One of the things I would consider, having traveled and worked around in probably 45 different states within special education dispute resolution services, one of the things I want to recognize is that there's nothing so valuable as a good question. But questions have to be asked with care. Turns out a lot of the things we put forward don't even count as questions. So, what's not a useful question? Leading or rhetorical ones. When we ask, wouldn't it be better if? What follows is not a question. It's a statement, right? It's a suggestion. Sometimes, if you're in the role of parent and you're being a bit heavy-handed, as I sometimes get, it's an imperative. Wouldn't it be better if you turned off that television right now? Colleagues, that's not a question. Secondly, closed-ended questions tend not to go so well when what we're discussing is complicated or complex or deeply meaningful. Pinning people down with a closed-ended yes or no, X or Y, this or that, tends to constrain conversation, tends to limit choices, tends to have folks feel hemmed in. And I invite you to reflect on your own experience. When someone says, oh, it's your choice, you can pick A or B, that may not be full choice, right? That's a constrained choice. So as an experienced negotiator, my response to such offers is usually, thanks for those options. I'd like us to commit to finding C, D, E, and F. And after we've got a full table of options, let's together make a decision. But to just be constrained with closed-ended questions doesn't really further conversation or creativity. So what might? Instead, I encourage you to practice asking questions that seek to learn, that gain insights, that invite sharing. So open-ended questions. How might we meet that goal? What are some ways we can find out that information? Information-seeking questions. Can you please help me understand how this relates or meets the interest? You've offered 1 hour with the motor team, for physical therapy, but I think we agreed in the IEP to 3 hours. Can you tell me how this is going to work? One of my personal heroes, if you thought Christopher Walken was a throwback, you'll probably think that Peter Falk is too. So down here is Peter Falk, one of the models for my own approaches to questions. He played the role of a detective on TV named Columbo. So as a child of the 70s, I got a fair bit of Columbo, but he was always just so thoughtful about asking open-ended or information-seeking questions. And in fact, one he didn't ask, but I could hear in his voice in my head, I borrow from one of the earliest mediation trainers, an eminent figure named John Haynes, from whom I took training back in the early 90s. But John had a really thoughtful question, which is when you've asked the question and the conversation is not going in a way that seems productive or constructive, or in fact, in the role of mediator, if things start getting more heated, when in fact I'm trying to go towards more calm, you might invoke this question. I think I asked the wrong question. What I meant to ask is, and you rephrase your question in a way that's more manageable, or optimistic, or future-oriented, or open-ended, right? But at least to my experience, especially as a teacher in the classroom, or a trainer training mediators around the country and the world, I find it very artful to just gently say, I'm sorry, I think I asked the wrong question, right? It allows the conversation to be channeled in a more constructive way without anyone having to be reprimanded, like, for taking the conversation in a less than useful way. And so this slide is too quick a summary of asking questions with care. That could probably be its own lunch and learn, frankly. But being thoughtful about consider your questions. This is something of a personal discipline that I'd encourage you to engage in. But be thoughtful to ask questions with care, please. Secondly, let me talk about listening for just a moment. And let's observe, though, quickly that this is a really totally rudimentary diagram, but many conversations that I observe look a bit like this. Each person taking a role as the speaker, sort of taking turns. And in fact, if you'll note, these lines overlap just a little bit. It turns out in lab research studies, watching people have conversations, that overlap is generally about 2 syllables. I invite you to go check this out on your own. Next time you're having lunch somewhere and seeing pairs of folks sitting down together having their own lunches, just take note of their conversational flow. This is not in any way wrong. In fact, it's a pretty accurate description of many conversations. But what it's not is a form of listening we call active listening or reflective listening. And the reason we employ these types of listening is to really let the speaker know that she or he has been heard and understood. Right? We want them to feel that they had our attention, that we heard what they said, and we often just check in to let them know. So if you would, compare this flow of a conversation to this one, right? First thing you'll note is that there's a speaker and a listener. They've adopted a distinct role. I suggest, do with this as you will, please, I would submit to you that playing the role of listener is most valuable when someone has a lot to say. When you can sense there's some oomph behind it. When someone had a really good day or a really bad day or is quite sad about something or otherwise concerned, reflective listening is about as good as it gets in my experience. It's a valuable skill that allows me to demonstrate that I'm putting all my focus on the speaker, and whatever they bring forth is what I'm there to hear. So, oops, I may have screwed that up, sorry. So it looks a little something like this. You have, did I stop my sharing? I'm sorry. If I did, I'm going to try to restart it. Forgive me, colleagues, technical glitch on my part. I touched the button I didn't mean to. Haha, I think we're back. So here we have our conversation. The speaker, who has a lot to say, a lot of emotional energy, something they need to have heard, speaks for some length, and the listener just checks in. Right? You're really upset about the missed appointments last month. Right? Someone goes on, they speak multiple sentences, they speak 2 paragraphs worth, and then the listener just checks in to let them know they've been heard and understood. Right? So here's the juxtaposition, the comparison between these 2 flows of conversation, and let's try to tease out some of the insights there. The first thing I'd say, I can't explain this graphic. Those are not the ears I prefer to wear. But in this green box, to my experience of working in and around conflict for 3 decades, it's been my professional career, straight out of college, frankly. Listening is simply the most critical skill for engaging conflict constructively. If you take away little else from my 45 minutes today, please recognize the high value of listening. It's closely tied to many other elements of strong relationships and effective workplaces, by the way. You know, you've perhaps heard the adage, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Or perhaps you're familiar with procedural justice, the concept that people abide by rules or outcomes based as much on how fair they thought the process was as that outcome or rule. Right? That's called procedural justice. When you study that concept of procedural fairness, people find processes and procedures fair when they got to use their voice, when they know that their views or concerns were heard and understood. Then they can listen to and find out, oh, this is how this goes. I mentioned to you, friends, that I used to work in court systems very frequently. And one of the things that those of us who work in court systems recognize, you can always tell someone who doesn't come to the courthouse real often, because they'll say this one line. They'll say, I want my day in court. You really don't. Trust me. I've been in a lot of courtrooms. Few people walk out of the courtroom thinking that's what happened. But let's pause with that statement for a moment. When someone says, I want my day in court, what are they asking for? They're asking to be heard and understood, and then to have whatever their concerns or ideas are to get some sort of a fair treatment being weighed out towards an outcome, right? But that's that same concept of procedural fairness. I submit to you that listening is the most important ingredient, the most relevant skill when you want to convey to someone your full attention. Respect them fully. 2 simple guidelines I'll offer you today. One is keep the focus on the speaker. And one way to accomplish that is 2, remember that you can't do 2 things at once if one of them is listening. And so I can share with you, colleagues, and I'll suggest you might try this out on your own. when someone needs my attention and comes in to speak to me, whether my role is ombuds or I'm serving as a mediator or facilitator, I silence and put my phone out of my way, out of my sight. I lower and close my laptop screen if it's available. I reorient myself, push back from my chair, and look fully at the person. But consider, please, whatever you can do when someone has something they need to say and you have the time and ability and energy to listen fully, I really recommend you make time and do that. The last thing I'll add to this slide about listening is that there are a lot of ways to listen. And for some, this doesn't feel very genuine. For others, it just flows very easily. But one of the principles of reflective listening that we see in many counseling services as well is just letting someone know they've been heard and understood. You feel upset about that decision. You feel excited about that opportunity. Just checking in. You'll note, please, a good reflection is one that doesn't grab the attention onto you, the listener. It keeps the attention with the speaker. All right. So when even in the role of advocate, when you deliver important information for which you need the district or the counselor or the teacher or the principal to hear, it's reasonable to anticipate they might have something they want to say back to you. And so at the same time, we might use our skills at assertion and conveying information. I pledge to you it goes better if you then also can turn on your listening skills and let them say what they need to in response. And you check in and let them know they've been heard and understood, and then you can proceed. But listening has proven, at least to me, to be a very, very valuable skill set that I want to highlight for you. Third and last, I'd like to talk about the concept of framing and reframing. I'll do this with a speech that I thought was delivered in Texas, but I later found out in research it was delivered in Mississippi. But before we get there, let me just talk about what framing and reframing are. Framing is a term used across many fields, including communication and political science, but it's about the lens through which we understand a fact or a reality, right? So there's a frame, and if you change the frame, things change. You might note the U.S. Department of Agriculture, when it was formed, there was a question about whether we would put the forestry, the U.S. Forest Service, would it go into the Department of Agriculture, which is where we put renewable crops and foodstuffs and other supplies, or would it go in the Department of the Interior, where we preserve beautiful land, right, pristine resources and otherwise? Well, think about that, if you will, as a frame, right? What do we think of a forest? Do we see a forest through a frame of, oh, this is a location that needs to be preserved. People can go walk there and restore themselves and interact with nature. It belongs in the interior. Or is a forest a renewable resource? Planted crops that are then harvested that might be renewed. And in fact, that was the thinking because the Department of Forestry, the Forest Service is located in the Department of Agriculture at this time. But that's my quick illustration of frames though, right? How do we frame things? Let's talk about this framing illustration here. It might be a little early in the day for most of us, but this was about whiskey. Noah Sweat, a legislator in Mississippi, was talking about his views on whiskey. If when you say whiskey, you mean the devil's brew, the poison scourge, the bloody monster that defiles innocence, dethrones reason, destroys the home, creates misery and poverty, yeah, literally takes the bread from the mouths of little children. If you mean the evil drink that topples man and woman from the pinnacle of righteous, gracious living into the bottomless pit of degradation and despair and shame, helplessness and hopelessness, then I'm certainly against it. But if when you say whiskey, you mean the oil of conversation, the philosophic wine, the ale that is consumed when good fellows get together, puts a song in their hearts and laughter on their lips and the warm glow of contentment in their eyes, if you mean Christmas cheer, if you mean the stimulating drink that puts the spring in the old gentleman's step on a frosty, crispy morning, if you mean the drink which enables man to magnify his joy, his happiness, and to forget, if only for a little while, life's great tragedies and heartaches and sorrows, if you mean that drink, the sale of which pours into our treasuries untold millions of dollars, which are used to provide tender care for our children, to build highways and hospitals and schools, then certainly I am all for it. Let's pause. This was not supposed to be an advertisement for or against whiskey, but I'd like you to recognize what legislator Sweat has done here is frame and reframe the very same topic. You might be wondering, How is that relevant to what we're here to talk about today, Tim? Well, let me quickly summarize with a quick chalkboard that where some folks see problem, you might choose to see opportunity. But let me list a few other ways that we might frame and reframe constructively. When people talk about individual problems, we might reframe those to be shared issues. Right? If someone's very concerned, I'm worried about how we're going to get, all of these needs met in just this one IEP in this one school year, you might make that a we. Well, I think the task is for us all to lean in and figure out how we're going to do that. Or from demands to underlying interests. I talked about positions and interests before. So when someone makes a claim or makes a position, a demand that's very hard to meet, you might at least reframe to say, well, it sounds like what you're interested in is making sure that you get respected in this way. Friends, I used to run a few nonprofits as executive director, and we didn't have big budgets. And it was really tough, therefore, when colleagues would come forth and say, I'd really like a raise. I've been here for 2 years now, and I really think I'm deserving. And I would have loved to have given a raise if we had the budget, but we didn't. So instead, I had to reframe and encourage their consideration of, we wish to recognize your contributions, your loyalty, your development. Can we think together of ways to do that other than the raise? I wish for a raise, it's not there, but maybe a title is useful. Maybe a parking spot, a windowed seat, more time off, whatever it is. I'm a union member myself, so I actually think the raise is important, don't get me wrong. But I want you to consider that if you shift conversation, if you reframe towards interests, what can sometimes be found are multiple ways of meeting whatever the interest might be. Let's continue with reframing possibilities. From judgments to concerns would be an important one to consider as well, or from the past to the future. One of the most common ways that I seek to reframe within my role as mediator and sometimes as parent at a meeting with schools is from past to the future. We can talk about what brought us here and the troubles we've been having, but I wonder if our time's better spent talking about what's next. How does tomorrow look different? Right? From a blame to a need. Sometimes when colleagues within disputes are hung up on deciding who's responsible, who's accountable, who's to blame, I might try to reframe and say, I hear that can be an important exercise, and I'd like to figure out how we're going to meet the underlying need here, though. Central is this child and her promise and what we owe to try to have her blossom as best she can. So we can figure out why it hasn't gone well. I'd be more interested in spending our time talking about how it's going to go better. Right? And then lastly, from problem to opportunity, if we might engage our negotiations, our mediations, our disputes with a lens that's always seeking opportunities, it helps a bit. It stimulates creativity, it's found, right, when we think of things as opportunities. So a few illustrations to round this point out. These may or may not fit well for you, but I'll offer. One of the things I reframe is metaphors or frames. So sometimes I'll hear someone think about, well, this is a battle. We got to go through it. And I'll rejoin with, this isn't so much a battle to be fought as a puzzle to be solved. Just trying to take the heat out, just trying to tamp down on, the idea that we're going to go at each other. About relationship, we might view this as you versus me. I'd prefer we think about it as you and I tackling this problem. Right? Simple reframe. This has felt like we're on opposite sides. This is the way these processes are often set up, but really we're on the same side of the table. We both want for this child the greatest opportunities, the most appropriate services to ensure the best possible growth. We're on the same side here, folks. Let's think together. Last emphasis I'll share here is about that past to future. You've raised strong concerns about the past. I wonder if we might turn our attention to possibilities for the future. Right? These are pivots. So I hope you'll recognize reframing a communication strategy, a skill set that really seeks to pivot conversations from destructive or contentious toward constructive or collaborative. It doesn't magically change strained relationships. It does help conversations, though, to pivot towards what's possible instead of what's not. We often tie these three together, by the way. Listening and reframing work well in sequence, whether they're in response to asking a question or not. But I hunch colleagues, you can see how after you've asked the question, it's useful to listen to the response fully, let the speaker know she or he's been heard and understood, And then you might reframe what you've heard toward a more constructive direction. Right? So I tend to ball these together within my own practice when I'm in the role of mediator, but it's also true when I'm in the role of advocate as well. I want to demonstrate respect for the counterpart by hearing them out as fully as I can. And I want to make sure that they understand that I heard. And I want to frame a problem we can solve together. I want to find where we have shared interests and build on those instead of focusing on our opposition where we stand apart and it's just a contest to see who might sway or push over the other. Let me do a quick check here. Okay, it was working. Great, thank you. So checking the chat, let me revisit our agenda one more time. So now we're in the third section, after you've met. 3 insights I've gleaned that I hope might be useful to you. First, reflect on your learnings. So short reflection number 2, think of a time when you were not calm, steady, and confident in a tough situation. You did not bring balance and reassurance, thoughtfulness and care. You were easily thrown off or distracted. You did let someone or something trigger you. If you can find one of those moments in your past, hopefully the not too recent past, but who knows, could have been yesterday, I just want to highlight for you that there's probably some learning from that meeting, but you got to spend time walking back through that meeting to find it, right? So it's a personal discipline. It's a dedicated practice I'd encourage you to do, but please recognize that once we've reached, for most of us, well, for many of us, I'll speak for myself, I've reached a point in my professional practices where I could go to another continuing education event and learn something, but most of the continuing education events that are on offer, I could lead them as well as take them. So in fact, one of the places I do the most learning about my professional services is through reflection. What did I do? How did it go? And especially for the ones that didn't go as hoped or planned, why not? What happened there? I'll give you an instance of one of these that was important for me. I used to think that I could come from a hectic meeting, drive to the spot of my next meeting, hop out of the car, walk in, stand in front of the mirror for just a moment, walk out, and go run a meeting. 250 people in a room, public policy topic needs to be facilitated. I'm here, let's go. And in fact, what I found is that after a couple of those meetings went okay, fine, but not good, I had to reflect on my state of mind, my approach. And what I've come to do as a practice now is I don't schedule important, intense events back to back. I leave a buffer. Sometimes it's a half hour, sometimes it's an hour. But I came to recognize that I pick up static and friction in each mediation I do, and that I got to have some time walking through and processing some of that, probably reflecting for learnings there too, but then get stable, then get steady, then get resourceful before I enter the next one. But that insight to not double book myself in a day only came from reflection. Taking time to recognize that when you've had an outing, you've had an exchange, it could just be a phone call with the school, it could have been an IEP meeting, it could have been a convening of the ARD committee. If you walked out feeling ill at ease about anything you said and did, that's an opportunity for you to do a little learning. Spend some time reflecting, walk through it and recognize what was it that got me off where I'd hoped to be, right? When did I stop being resourceful? Oh, it was when the principal threw out this comment about my older child who used to go to the school. Man, that triggered me. The next time I come to a meeting, I'll need to have prepared myself to deflect those types of triggers, channel those elsewhere, as an example, right? So the insight on this slide, please, colleagues, is reflect on experiences that didn't go well and seek to learn from them. There's also benefit to reflecting on things that did go well and can build on those too, but you have to make the time. Many of us, I'll speak for myself, I often miss opportunities for deep learning because I don't budget in the time for reflection. I had a meeting, it was unpleasant, I'm glad it's over, good. But if that's where I leave it, I probably left some learnings on the table too. Let me move forward to make sure we stay within our allotted time, dear colleagues. How about Nelson Mandela's insight on this? I never lose. I either win or I learn. Or, more appropriate to Texas, Chuck Norris. The only time you lose at something is when you don't learn from the experience. So, I know I ended up with two men on the same slide here. I apologize. I couldn't come up with a quotation quickly enough that would diversify my crew. At any rate, moving forward. The second thing related to reflection I want to highlight for you is making some notes. And I find this really important when I work with parents and work with colleagues at state education agencies too. After an intense meeting with covering intensive and relevant and important information, you got to make some notes. You just can't rely on the human brain, especially in an excited state of mind, when there's been a lot of creativity, or there's been some tension in the room, or there's been some conflict that needed to get calmed. We don't tend to walk away having laid down the details, the memories that we need to. And so I might invite you to pair the reflection discipline with this note-taking discipline, right? Note to self. Sometimes it's just important information, right? Info you just learned about, a new bill just passed the House and it's going to be relevant to how we pay for compensatory education, or whether it's an event that just got scheduled or otherwise. So it could be detail oriented, or it could be the beginning of your reflections too. Hey, what did I do well that I liked? What did I do that I should probably change? But if you don't make those notes, they don't exist for you to look back on and guide your work. So I'll again chalk this up to a disciplined practice, but it's only when I make time, it's only when you make time to make those notes and or engage in that reflection that you can glean the deeper understanding. So please, if you would, consider the importance of always recording what happened that was noteworthy, that's going to be influential or useful as you move forward. Lastly, the last thing I want to share with you, my 9th point out of the 9, is to know that you've got support. So you're here at an event hosted by Partners Resource Network. Right, just a quick snapshot from one of the resource pages on the on the website. Look at all the available materials here, right? And there's even sort of an important map of other related agencies too, right in the center of this, right? So this all exists on the PRN Texas website as well. And I'll support that further. We might pull back and look at the CADRE websites. So here we have, you see the website at the bottom here. CADRE, in case you're curious, it's up in the upper left, the Center for Appropriate Dispute Resolution in Special Education. We've been renamed by OSEP to be the National Center for Dispute Resolution in Special Education, but we kind of like the name CADRE we came up with, 25 years ago. At any rate, what you'll see here, please, on the left, though, lots of information available at the website about how things work. And then there's a whole section developed for families, which has state-level information, steps to success, parent guides to all of our dispute resolution processes available around the country as well. You'll note available in multiple languages. We've got materials on collaborative advocacy, some of the guiding principles to be a resource person advocating for either your child or others, communicating with your child's school, and then in the upper right of this slide, a whole bunch of the processes to help understand what are these procedural safeguards, what are these processes more fully. So these are some of the elements that are on offer that I hope you might take advantage of as well, alongside those within Texas. And then I'll close on this slide and leave room for conversation or question and answer as we wish. But this is my wrap up and thanks. And there's a QR code in case you'd like our CADRE newsletter. It's not a very heavy lift. One of my roles in the newsletter is I try to distill out useful academic or practical literature as it comes out that folks otherwise might not see. As I live a university life, I have access to some library resources that help me stay up to date on important elements, or there's a finding that folks might not otherwise come across. We try to get that out through our newsletter, along with events and other resources and events like today's webinar. So on that note, I'm going to stop sharing and check the chat and kick it back to you if you have questions, comments, or concerns for me. Stop share.
All right, we do have a number of questions in the Q&A box. As a reminder, if you're joining us on Zoom, please have your questions in the Q&A box. The chat can get really busy. And if you're joining us on Facebook, you can type them in comments. So I will help facilitate the questions. So the first one is, how can we identify the difference between interests and positions?
Ah, thank you. I think that the quickest identifier for interest or position is that a position demands a specific way forward, and interest informs that and can be met in multiple ways. So anytime someone says, this is what I want, if you can ask the question, what's a good way of doing that? And they say just the same thing, that's a position. But if you say, what would having that do for you? How would that be useful? Why is that a good idea? You're generally moving from a position to an interest. They're going to tell you what interest that serves. And so I generally just ask either of those questions to check in quickly. But as often as not, positions are fully formed demands. Interests are broadly met. I'd like to see my child thrive. There are many ways to do that.
Excellent. Oh, here's a great question. Any tips for parents when the relationship between parent and school is already adversarial? Can you suggest some ways that parents can help recover and improve that relationship?
Thank you for that question. It's certainly a challenge, and I would go back to that term resourceful, and I would encourage parents to find within them the resourceful state to go back to that strained relationship and say, I don't think this is going as well as it could. I don't know about you, but I find when we have conversations that are filled with tension or anger or recrimination, and I'd like to see if we can't find a reset button. Can you think with me on ways we can find a reset button to have this conversation differently? Right? But it's really about what many of us would call meta communication, a strange term, but one of its definitions means talking about how you'll talk. Hey, I have a suggestion. When we meet, why don't we have a couple guidelines? One of them is whoever's speaking gets to finish whatever they're saying. So I commit to not interrupting you till you're done speaking. I would ask you to commit to not interrupting me till we're done speaking. I do the same thing, by the way, colleagues, with negotiations. When I've had a stressful time negotiating with a counterpart or even a colleague, I work at a large university, for example, and inevitably we have contests over resources or whatever it might be. I offer this point of meta communication. I say, listen, I'd like to offer you something that I hope you might offer me. I will stick with our conversation. I'll stay in this negotiation for as long as it takes until you're happy with the outcome, if you'll make the same pledge to me. And by doing so, what I'm really doing is I'm putting away all of my tools. I teach negotiation to attorneys and judges. I can negotiate pretty meanly if you want me to, but I don't want to, and nor do you. So I offer that I will not negotiate harshly if you won't either. Let's agree. We're not done until you're happy, and you are committed to staying until I'm happy. Same idea of meta communication. And so I appreciate the challenge of once things are strained, it's hard to get back, but it's going to take somebody trying to rebuild that bridge.
We have a number of questions that kind of are all very similar, talking about how to kind of handle high emotions when you're very emotional. One parent asked for ideas to kind of help calm emotions in a timely manner so that they're able to respond quicker. Another one is, how can you listen well when your emotions are high? And then any ideas on kind of how to script things and word things that take emotion out of it. So speak a little bit, if you would, about how to control those emotions when you're negotiating and working with the school.
So this is going to sound flippant, and I apologize for it, but at some level, this is a little bit about that check yourself before you wreck yourself. And so some of my colleagues would encourage you to look up sort of mindfulness or mindful meditation as an approach. And the reason they encourage this is not because they need to go meditate, but the central insights of mindfulness meditation, in my understanding, is that you recognize the distinction between a stimulus and your response, right? And so that to keep yourself at a point of balance with some equanimity, some ability to be resourceful, if you will, it takes a discipline, it takes a practice that you have figured out how to say, boy, this feels tense. That person just insulted me. They just called my idea stupid. I'm agitated. And learning to channel that agitation toward, I got to resolve. I got to double down on my resolve to stay in this conversation. My child needs me. I'm playing for a larger goal here. I want the best for my child and this school system. I don't wish for this to end badly, so I got to rise even higher. And so I think really there's going to be a practice, and it is a practice for most of us, It was challenging for me. I'm an impulsive person. And so when I'm provoked, it's easy to spin up. And the challenge becomes how do I spin down? So to the second point there that I appreciate you tying in, I would think about phrasing things carefully. I often encourage folks to do two processes before I re-engage with someone with whom I've had a hard time engaging the first time. The first is called writing a letter I may never send. No joke, colleagues. I have a dear friend who teaches at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Her name is Mary Rowe, R-W-O-E. And if you look up Mary Rowe and look up sending a letter or just writing a letter, whatever you look up, she lays out the value of writing a letter that you may never send. But she encourages you that if you've been hurt or you found this relationship stressful or someone has wronged you or even harassed you, she counsels, put it in writing. Write down what you felt, how this made you feel, what you'd like to see going forward. You may never send that letter. You may throw it away right now. But the processing of your own thoughts, your own feelings, your own emotions can give you a sense of control and capacity to do it differently. The related point I'd offer is that through my many years of mediation, I really encourage people to come with a bulleted list of either phrases they want to say or topics they want to address. Because it happens almost without fail that the longer a meeting drags on, the more tension spins up, the more ideas are floating around, it's hard to regain your focus. So if you've thought in advance and made a short bulleted list on a piece of paper you can consult, it brings you right back to where you should be. And I actually do, by the way, colleagues, practice phrasing my statements because it's really easy to wind up and say it in a provocative, aggressive, confrontational way. But if it could just as easily be said in a non-confrontational, inviting cooperation way, probably makes for a better conversation.
Excellent. So we have a parent asking if there are any good resources for parents to kind of learn these soft skills. So something more than just watching this where they can have a little more information, maybe have some more practice.
Yeah, I would say here's where I look to our network of parent resources and parent centers around the country, and also the CADRE website. I would point out that as I was closing there, I may not have given appropriate time for, but we've developed a handful of instructional videos to help model and extend some of these insights and lessons. So I hope those might be available. And the last thing we do, frankly, is that I and other of my colleagues get dispatched to regional parent centers meetings and offer longer form workshops, 3-hour or 6-hour workshops on specific skill sets. We don't present ourselves as experts in law. We aren't lawyers or resources on that front. We are expert at trying to have smoother, more effective communication and trying not to harm relationships while achieving the important goals for children within education. And so I appreciate that in this 45 minutes, I did not go deep at all. I probably highlighted more opportunities than ever. And I'll say to you all, dear colleagues, after 30 years of being a professional mediator, I still take every opportunity I can to go to any workshop on listening that's advertised. I don't care who's offering it. Human resources professionals, social workers, counselors. I go to listening workshops because I always learn. It's been the most important thing that I can engage as well. So I hope that speaks to some of these elements. I'm not sure it's going to be very responsive to those who are seeking far more details, and I apologize.
Fantastic. I love it. Always learning more and doing better. I love it. So a good question. Can you help parents understand kind of at what point is it time to kind of seek additional help? Maybe facilitated IEP or mediation. When is it time to kind of go to that next level?
Sure. So, unsatisfying answer number 5 already. I would say that this is more art than science, but whenever you feel there's a hiccup, whenever there's a barrier, if you're hesitant to make the phone call because you anticipate unpleasantness, that's probably the time to find out, does my local parent center or does my school district offer, for example, facilitated IEP meetings? Right? In many parts of Texas, there have been cooperative relationships between school districts where they share facilitators. So it's not a cost basis. It's sort of a volunteer effort. That's what I heard of some years ago there. That's also what mediators do. Many communities have volunteer mediators and facilitators at community dispute resolution centers or community mediation centers who are often involved in education as well. So sometimes when the conversation is impaired, when the communication is distressed, and what's needed is someone else to be responsible for just orchestrating the conversation. The last thing I'll say quickly is part of being resourceful to me is knowing when I need to take a break. So that if I'm being wound up or I'm being provoked or I can sense my agitation, it's probably a key point for me to say to everyone in the room, I'm sorry, I can't be useful right now. I'm going to need 5 minutes at least to go outside, and I don't smoke cigarettes, but if I did, I'd probably go do that. Right? But be thoughtful, please, about that as well, to not add oxygen to the fire when things aren't going well. Because it's usually pretty easy to say to your counterpart, hey, I'm not having a good time in this conversation. Are you? No, this is awful. I agree. What are some ways we can change this up? I'm going to suggest we stop now, but before we get back together, what if we each email each other what we want the other to hear so we get back together, it's a discussion of those points instead of having to trot them out here? Because it seems like whenever we go back over them, it winds me up. As an example, self-knowledge is powerful, but the goal is we want to move forward with helping our child's education go as best it can. So those would be my quick suggestions, and I appreciate that in many situations where things are very strained, there is a reason we have the whole continuum. There is a reason we have due process hearings. When communication is too impaired, that's often when parents or others will file a complaint and say, dear TEA, need you to look into this, find out what's going on here, or file for a due process hearing. The concern is those are awfully expensive events, at least in terms of time, if not emotional energy, and often money, right? So if we might think about, let's take advantage of everything upstream of those to our fullest extent. Can we have a facilitated IEP? Might we meet and talk in mediation? Might we convene the ARD committee under a new set of guidelines that we develop ourselves for making it go better? Those are all probably going to have more direct returns for the child's education than running things through an adversarial process. So I offer that in hope, but I don't want to dismiss the reality of there are some very distressed and stressful relationships out there between schools and families.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Our time is up for today. So as we're wrapping up, lots of great comments in chat, lots of thank yous. One parent said this has been one of the most useful and informative webinars I've attended.
Oh,
so
gosh.
Thank you so much for the wealth of information that you have shared with us today. We really appreciate it. As we're wrapping up, I'm going to share my screen one more time as we wrap up. And so once again, I just want to thank you all for joining us for today's webinar. I hope you found the information as useful as we did. And thank you once again, Dr. Hedeen, for joining us and sharing your wealth of information. We appreciate all that you do and all that your colleagues at CADRE do to help parents and to help us as Parent Training and Information Center. So thank you again. As a reminder,
Certainly.
the recording of our webinar will be available on our website at prntexas.org as well as our Facebook page. And if you're needing a certificate of attendance, you will be receiving an email to thank you for attending today's webinar. You can follow the link in that email to get your certificate of attendance. Our spring lineup of webinars will be coming out soon, so be sure to check out our website and our Facebook page for more information about webinars coming up in the spring. And I want to thank all of our collaborators in this series. This is the final webinar in this series, but we've had a wonderful partnership with all of these agencies to bring you some fantastic webinars. And so we just want to thank all of them one more time for joining us in this series. And on the screen now is contact information for our Director of Statewide Services, Christina, our support specialist, Chelsea, and myself. Please be sure to check out our website at prntexas.org for information on upcoming webinars and events in your local areas, as well as lots of information for parents. You can follow us on Facebook and X at PRN Texas. Thank you again so much. Dr. Hedeen, it has been a pleasure to have you join us. Thank you for all of the fantastic information in helping us communicate better with our child's school and to keep things positive and constructive and focus on the student. Thank you again. And thank you all for joining us.
Take care, friends.
Thank you.